The Galactic Council had watched humans for 300 years. They had seen them crawl out of their solar system in ships held together by hope and metal. They had watched them spread to a dozen worlds, then 100. And in all that time, the Council had never understood what made humans different from every other species that had tried to expand among the stars. Ambassador Vexrel of the Cathari stood at the observation window of Station 12, her 4 eyes fixed on the brown and gray world below. Nexar 7 had been declared dead 2 centuries ago. The atmosphere was thin and toxic. The soil was full of poisons. Nothing grew there except hardy fungus that even the most desperate species refused to eat. The planet hung in space like a forgotten corpse. "They cannot be serious," Vexrel said to her aide. "The humans want this world." Her aide, a young Cathari named Tavik, checked his data pad with obvious confusion. "They have submitted formal colonization papers. The Council approved it yesterday." Why would anyone approve giving them a dead rock? Because no one else wanted it. The mining rights expired 40 years ago when the last valuable ores were extracted. There is nothing left of value. The planet has been abandoned ever since. Vexrel made a sound of disgust deep in her throat. Humans were strange creatures. They had soft bodies and short lives. They needed specific temperatures and specific air mixtures just to survive. They were fragile in ways that made other species laugh at galactic gatherings. And yet they kept expanding. They kept growing. They kept taking worlds that no one wanted and somehow making them work. It was a pattern that had confused the Council for generations. "When do they arrive?" Vexrel asked. "The first colony ship enters orbit in 6 hours. Vexrel turned away from the window. "I will be there to greet them. The Council wants someone to document this failure. I suppose that task falls to me." 6 hours later, Vexrel stood in the station's docking bay as the human ship connected with a gentle thud. It was called the New Dawn, and it was larger than she had expected. Most colony ships were small and efficient, designed to carry only what was absolutely necessary. This one was massive, with cargo holds that seemed to go on forever. Vexrel could not imagine what they intended to carry in all that space. The airlock opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and a human woman stepped through. She was tall for her species, with brown skin and gray hair pulled back from her face. She wore simple work clothes and boots that had clearly seen many years of hard use. "Ambassador Vexrel," the woman said. Her voice was warm and friendly, without any hint of the nervousness that most colonists showed when meeting Council representatives. "I'm Director Sarah Chen. Thank you for meeting us." Vexrel performed the formal greeting gesture of her people, bringing all 4 arms together in the traditional cross pattern. "The Council welcomes you to Nexar 7, though I must confess, I do not understand why you have come to this place." Sarah Chen smiled. It was a human expression that Vexrel had learned to recognize over her years of diplomatic service. It usually meant they found something amusing that others did not. "This world needs help," Sarah said simply. "We're here to give it." "Help, Director Chen, this world is dead. The soil is toxic with heavy metals. The atmosphere barely exists, and what little there is would poison any known life form. Nothing can grow here. Nothing has grown here for thousands of years." "Nothing has grown here yet," Sarah corrected gently. "That's different from nothing can grow here. The second is a permanent condition. The first is just a temporary situation." Vexrel did not know how to respond to such obvious foolishness. She followed Sarah Chen to the observation deck, where the human director pointed at the barren landscape visible far below them. "What do you see, Ambassador?" "I see rock. I see dust. I see a world that should have been left alone to continue its slow decay into nothing. I see potential." Sarah's eyes were bright with something that Vexrel did not understand and could not name. "I see mountains that could hold forests someday. I see valleys that could hold rivers. I see plains that could support farms. I see a world waiting to wake up from a very long sleep." The unloading began that same day, and it continued for weeks. Vexrel watched from the observation deck as thousands of humans emerged from the ship. But they were not alone. They brought animals in climate-controlled containers that hummed with power. They brought plants in sealed pods that glowed with artificial light. They brought insects in glass cases and worms in soil boxes and seeds in temperature-regulated vaults that stretched on and on. "What is all this?" Vexrel asked, genuinely confused for the first time in her long career. "Earth life," Sarah said with obvious pride. "When we colonize a world, we don't just bring ourselves, we bring everything." Everything. Bacteria, fungi, insects, plants, animals, fish for the rivers we will make, birds for the skis we will create, everything needed to build an ecosystem from the ground up, a complete package of life. Vexrel's 4 eyes blinked in confusion. Other species bring only what they need to survive. They build sealed habitats that protect them from hostile environments. They import food from other worlds where it can be grown safely. "That's why their colonies stay small," Sarah said. "That's why they remain dependent on supply ships for generations. We do things differently." The first year on Nexar 7 was hard. Vexrel watched from Station 12 as the humans struggled against the dead world below. They built atmospheric processors that worked day and night, pumping oxygen and nitrogen into the thin, poisonous air. They tested the soil in thousands of locations and found it full of heavy metals that would kill most life forms within hours. But they did not give up. They did not request evacuation. They did not complain to the council. They brought in special bacteria from Earth, tiny organisms that had evolved over billions of years to survive in the worst places on their home world. These bacteria could eat poison and turn it into something else. They could transform toxic heavy metals into harmless compounds. They released them into the soil by the billions, like a living army of invisible workers. "This is madness," Vexrel said to Tavik during one of their regular observation sessions. "They are pouring resources into a world that will never support them." "The council agrees," Tavik said. "Most members expect the colony to fail within 5 years. There is already discussion about when to send the evacuation ships." Vexrel watched the humans work through her telescope. They built greenhouses first, growing food in controlled environments while they prepared the outside world for the coming transformation. They planted hardy grasses in the treated soil, watching most of them die within days, but celebrating wildly when a few survived. A human scientist named Dr. James Okonkwo gave Vexrel a tour of the processing facilities during one of her surface visits. He was a large man with a quick laugh and hands that were always dirty from working in the soil. "The key is patience," he explained, leading her through row after row of biological processing tanks. "Earth wasn't always friendly to life either. Billions of years ago, our atmosphere was poisoned too, pure carbon dioxide and ammonia. Life changed it. Life transformed the whole planet over millions of years. We're just speeding up that process with better tools and more knowledge." "But why?" Vexrel asked. "Why work so hard for a world that gives you nothing in return?" Dr. Okonkwo picked up a handful of the treated soil from one of the test beds. It was still gray and lifeless looking, but Vexrel could see small things moving in it. Worms, the humans called them, creatures that seemed utterly pointless. "Because it won't always give us nothing," he said, letting the soil fall through his fingers. "Someday, this will be a garden. Someday, children will be born here who never know what a dead world looks like. They'll run through forests and swim in rivers and never understand why we worked so hard." "You will not live to see that day," Vexrel pointed out. "Your species lives such short lives." "No," Dr. Okonkwo agreed without any trace of sadness. "But they will. Our children and their children, that's enough for me." By the end of the first year, the atmosphere was slightly thicker. The soil in the treatment zones was slightly less toxic. And in one small greenhouse that had become a place of pilgrimage for the colonists, A single tree had grown to the height of a human child. Director Sarah Chen called Vexrul down to see it herself. "It's an oak," Sarah said, touching the small tree with gentle fingers that trembled slightly. "On Earth, these trees live for hundreds of years. Some live for 1,000 or more. This one might still be alive when my great-great-grandchildren are old and gray." Vexrul looked at the tree. It was small and fragile, nothing like the massive plants that grew on Kethari worlds. But there was something about the way Sarah looked at it that made Vexrul pay attention. There was love there, and hope, and something else she could not identify. "You truly believe you can save this world," Vexrul said. It was not a question. "I know we can," Sarah replied with absolute certainty. "We've done it before. Earth itself was in bad shape once. We nearly killed it with our pollution and carelessness. But we learned. We changed. And now we bring what we learned to other worlds." Vexrul left the greenhouse with more questions than answers. She filed her first-year report to the council, documenting everything she had seen in careful detail. The council read it and dismissed it as human foolishness, another example of the strange species and their unrealistic dreams. But Vexrul was not so sure anymore. She had seen something in that greenhouse that defied easy explanation. The second year brought the first rains. Vexrul had not expected this. The atmospheric processors had been working constantly, but she had not understood what they were building toward. When the first clouds formed over the treatment zones, dark and heavy with moisture, the humans gathered outside their shelters to watch. Director Sarah Chen stood in the open, her face turned up to the sky. Around her, thousands of colonists did the same. They were waiting for something, holding their breath in collective anticipation. The first drop fell on Sarah's cheek. She laughed out loud and wiped it away with trembling fingers. "It's working," she said to Vexrul, who watched from the shelter of a doorway. "Come out here, feel this." "I would prefer to stay dry." "That's the point, Ambassador. This is the first time in 10,000 years that water has fallen from the sky on this world. This is history being made. You should be part of it." Vexrul stepped out into the rain. It was light, barely more than a mist against her scales. But it was real. Water from the atmosphere falling on a world that had been dead. It seemed impossible, and yet it was happening before her eyes. The colonists celebrated that night with a joy that seemed excessive to Vexrul. They played music and danced and shared food and told stories. Vexrul attended, trying to understand what she was seeing. A young human girl approached her during the festivities. She could not have been more than 10 Earth years old, with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile. "Are you the alien lady?" the girl asked without any trace of fear. "I am Ambassador Vexrul of the Kethari. My mom says you're writing about us for the whole galaxy. Is that true?" "In a manner of speaking, yes. I am documenting this colony for the council." The girl smiled even wider. "Make sure you write about the rain. That was my favorite part ever. I will include it in my report." "Good." The girl ran off to join her friends, leaving Vexrul to contemplate what she had witnessed. Vexrul watched the celebration continue late into the night. These humans worked harder than any species she had ever observed, and they seemed genuinely happy doing it, even when the work was exhausting and the results uncertain. The third year brought something Vexrul had not expected so soon. The crops came in. Not outside, not yet. But the greenhouses were producing enough food to feed the colony without outside supplies. This was significant. Most alien colonies remained dependent on imports for decades, sometimes for a century or more. The humans had achieved food independence in just 3 years. Dr. Okonkwo showed Vexrul the fields inside the largest greenhouse with obvious pride. There were rows of green plants as far as she could see, stretching toward artificial lights that mimicked Earth's sun. "Wheat," he said, pointing to golden stalks swaying gently in the circulated air. "Corn, rice, potatoes, carrots, beans, All the basics of human nutrition and more variety every season. Why so many varieties? Surely one type of food would be more efficient to grow. Efficiency isn't everything. Variety keeps people healthy, it keeps them happy, and it keeps the ecosystem stable. I do not understand the connection between food variety and ecosystem stability. Dr. Okonkwo led her to another section of the greenhouse. Here there were no food crops. Instead, there were flowers of every color imaginable. Reds and yellows and blues and purples, arranged in patterns that seemed almost chaotic but somehow pleased the eye. "These are pollinators," he said, pointing to insects moving between the flowers. "Bees, butterflies, moths, they carry pollen from plant to plant. Without them, most of our crops would fail to reproduce. And the flowers serve what purpose? Food for the pollinators. Everything connects to everything else. That's how ecosystems work. You can't just grow food. You have to grow the whole system that supports the food. The bacteria that break down waste. The fungi that help roots absorb nutrients. The insects that pollinate and control pests. The worms that create soil. It all works together." Vexrel spent more time on the surface after that conversation. She visited the treatment zones, where the soil was slowly changing color from gray to brown. She watched the workers releasing earthworms by the thousands, millions, billions. "The worms are the foundation," a worker explained during one observation. She was a young woman named Maria, with strong arms and a constant smile despite the hard labor. "They eat dead plant matter and turn it into good soil. They dig tunnels that help water flow through the ground. They're not exciting, but they're essential to everything else. On my world, we would use machines for such tasks. Machines break down and need repairs. Worms make more worms. They fix themselves. They adapt to conditions. Which one do you think works better over 100 years? Vexrel had no answer to that practical question. The fourth year brought the first outdoor crops. Not wheat or corn, not yet. Just grass. Simple, hardy grass that could survive in the partially treated soil where nothing had grown for millennia. But to the humans, it was a miracle worthy of celebration. They planted it in a field the size of a small city. They watered it carefully and tended it with devotion and watched it grow blade by blade. And when the first green shoots pushed through the soil, they celebrated again with the enthusiasm they brought to everything. Director Sarah Chen invited Vexrel to walk through the field with her. The grass was short and thin, barely covering the ground. But it was green, living green on a world that had been dead. "I never thought I would see this," Vexrel admitted for the first time. "Neither did the council," Sarah said. "They've been expecting us to fail for 4 years now. I think some of them are starting to get nervous." "Nervous? Why would they be nervous about your success?" "Because if we succeed here, it proves something they don't want to admit." "And what is that?" Sarah stopped walking. She looked out at the field of grass, at the clouds gathering in the sky, at the distant mountains that would someday hold forests. Her eyes held that same brightness Vexrel had seen before. "That life finds a way," she said. "That any world can be healed. That nothing is truly dead if you're willing to work hard enough to save it." "This concerns the council." "It should. Think about it, Ambassador. How many dead worlds are there in this galaxy? How many were destroyed by war or pollution or neglect? The Council has always said those worlds are lost forever, beyond any hope of recovery. But what if they're wrong? What if every single one of those worlds could be brought back to life? Vexrel thought about the implications. Hundreds of dead worlds. Thousands. All of them potentially habitable. All of them potentially home to new civilizations, new growth, new possibilities. "That would change everything," she said. "Yes," Sarah agreed, "it would." The 5th year brought the insects in earnest. Not the careful, controlled insects of the greenhouses. These were wild releases. Thousands of species set loose into the slowly healing environment of Nexar 7 to find their own niches and build their own populations. Vexril watched a release ceremony from a hillside overlooking the main settlement. Below her, workers opened containers and let their contents fly free into the growing world. Beetles and flies and moths and things she had no names for scattered into the air, each one seeking its place in the emerging ecosystem. Dr. Okonkwo stood beside her, explaining what she was seeing with his usual enthusiasm. "Every insect has a job," he said. "Some break down dead matter and return nutrients to the soil. Some pollinate plants. Some control other insect populations. Some are food for larger animals that will come later. They're all necessary pieces of a very complex puzzle. What if the balance is wrong? What if some species become too numerous and destroy others? Then we release their predators, or we adjust the environment to favor their competitors. It's complicated, but we've been studying this on Earth for centuries. We know how ecosystems work. We know how to guide them. Your species nearly destroyed your own ecosystem through ignorance." "Yes, and we learned from that terrible mistake. We won't make it again." The insects spread across the treated zones over the following months. Within a year, Vexril could hear them at night when she visited the surface, a chorus of clicks and chirps and buzzes that had never existed on this world before. The sound was strange to her ears at first, but she came to appreciate it. It was the sound of life returning to a place that had known only silence. The 6th year brought the first trees outside the greenhouses. They were small and carefully chosen, species that could survive in poor soil with little water. Pioneer trees, the humans called them, plants that could grow where nothing else could, preparing the ground for species that would follow. They fixed nitrogen in the soil. They provided shade and shelter. They began the slow process of building a true forest. A Kethari research delegation arrived to study what the humans were doing. They were led by High Scholar Nexith, an old and respected scientist who had spent her entire life studying dead worlds and their restoration possibilities. "This is impossible," Nexith said, standing in a grove of young trees on what had been barren rock 6 years before. "The soil chemistry is wrong. The temperature variation is too extreme. These plants should not be able to survive here." "And yet they do," Dr. Okonkwo said with a smile. "How? What is your secret technique?" "No secret, just patience and hard work over years. We didn't plant these trees in the original soil. We treated the soil first, changed its chemistry with bacteria, added organic matter from our compost systems, made it hospitable to life 1 cubic meter at a time. That would take decades by our calculations. It took 6 years. We used bacteria and fungi and worms, billions of tiny organisms working together every moment of every day, doing what machines can never do, building life from the ground up." High Scholar Nexith spent a month on Nexar 7. She took samples and measurements and recordings. When she left, she carried a report that would eventually reach the highest levels of the Council. "Life engineering on a planetary scale," she called it in her conclusions. "The humans are not just colonizing worlds, they are transforming them. They are taking dead matter and making it live again." The 7th year brought the first small animals. Rabbits and squirrels and mice, creatures that seemed insignificant to Vexril but served essential purposes that the humans explained at length. They spread seeds in their droppings. They dug burrows that aerated the soil. They became food for larger predators that would come later. Each one played its part. Vexril had been on Station 12 for 7 years now. She had watched the dead world below slowly come to life through her observation window. She had documented every step, every setback, every triumph in her reports. Her reports to the Council had changed over time. The early ones were skeptical, dismissive even. The later ones were curious, full of questions. The most recent ones were something close to amazed. The humans have achieved something unprecedented, she wrote in her seventh-year report. They have taken a world that was declared permanently uninhabitable by Council survey teams and transformed it into something approaching a living ecosystem. The process is not complete. It will take many more years, perhaps decades, before Nexar 7 is fully self-sustaining. But the foundation has been laid. The work is possible. The Council read her report. This time, they did not dismiss it. Director Sarah Chen invited Vexrel to her home for dinner shortly after. It was a modest house in the main settlement, built of local materials and surrounded by a small garden that was her personal project. The garden was her pride, full of vegetables and flowers that she tended herself despite her many other responsibilities. 7 years, Sarah said, pouring a drink made from fruits grown on Nexar 7. I didn't think I would still be here at this point. I thought we would have achieved basic stability by now and I could move on to the next project. The next project. There are more dead worlds waiting out there, more places that need help. This is just the beginning of what we can accomplish. Vexrel tasted the drink. It was sweet and slightly tart, not unpleasant at all. Why do you do this? She asked. You could live comfortable lives on established worlds. You could stay safe and secure and never risk anything. Why do you insist on going to the hardest places? Sarah thought about the question for a long moment. She looked out the window at her garden, at the settlement beyond, at the green hills rising in the distance where nothing had grown 7 years ago. Because they're there, she finally said. Because they're waiting for us. Because somewhere deep in our history, humans decided that no challenge was too great, no world was beyond saving, no dream was impossible. That seems naive. Maybe it is, but it got us here, didn't it? Standing on a world that used to be dead, drinking fruit juice from plants that never existed here before. If that's naivete, I'll take it. The 8th year brought rain that fell reliably without assistance. Not just from the atmospheric processors anymore. The ecosystem was starting to regulate itself in ways the humans had predicted, but Vexrel found amazing. Moisture from the expanding vegetation rose into the air and came back down as natural precipitation. The water cycle was beginning to work on its own. The Council sent another delegation to observe and document. This one was larger and included representatives from 12 different species. They spent 3 months studying every aspect of the colony. Their report was extensive, running to thousands of pages of analysis, but the conclusion was simple. The human method of colonization is fundamentally different from any other known approach in galactic history. Rather than adapting to environments, humans adapt environments to themselves. They bring not just technology, but entire biological systems. The result is colonies that become self-sustaining more quickly and require fewer ongoing resources. The report also included a recommendation that would echo through Council chambers for years. The Council should consider adopting human techniques for terraforming dead worlds. The potential benefits are enormous. Some Council members objected strongly. They said it was too expensive, too time-consuming, too uncertain, but others saw the possibilities. Dead worlds could become new homes, damaged ecosystems could be restored, the galaxy could be transformed. The debate would continue for years, but the seed had been planted. The 9th year brought director Sarah Chen's funeral. She had been old when she arrived on Nexar 7. She had known she might not live to see her work completed, but she had come anyway, driven by a vision she could not abandon even at the cost of her remaining years. Thousands of colonists attended the ceremony. They gathered in a meadow that had not existed 8 years ago, surrounded by grass and flowers and young trees that swayed in a natural breeze. The sky was blue with scattered clouds. Birds sang in the distance, species that had been released just 2 years before. Vexrel attended as well. She stood at the back of the crowd, watching humans she had come to know over 9 years. They wept and laughed and told stories about their director. Dr. Okonkwo gave the eulogy to the assembled mourners. "Sarah once told me that she didn't need to see the forest to know they would grow," he said, his voice carrying across the meadow. "She planted seeds knowing she would never sit in their shade. That's not faith. That's not hope. That's something else entirely. It's the certainty that comes from understanding how life works. Seeds become trees. Given enough time, enough care, enough patience, every dead world can become a garden." They buried her in the meadow where she had loved to walk. A stone marked her grave, and someone planted an oak seedling beside it. "The tree will grow for centuries," Dr. Okonkwo told Vexrel afterward. "Long after everyone here is gone, long after anyone remembers her name, but the tree will remain. That's immortality of a kind." Vexrel did not know how to respond. Her people did not think about death the same way humans did. But she could see the comfort it brought them, this idea of leaving something behind that would outlast them. The 10th year brought the first forest. Not a true forest, not yet, but the pioneer trees had spread beyond their original planting zones. They had found favorable spots and taken root without human help. They had grown taller than any human. Their branches intertwined, creating shade and shelter and homes for countless creatures. Vexrel walked through the young forest with Dr. Okonkwo, who had become the new director of the colony after Sarah's death. The ground beneath their feet was soft with fallen leaves. The air smelled different here, full of growing things and decay and new growth rising from the old. "This is what she wanted," Okonkwo said quietly. "This is what we all wanted, a living world. It will take more time to complete. Of course, decades, maybe centuries, but the hard part is done. The ecosystem is establishing itself now without our constant intervention. It will grow and change and adapt. It will become something we never planned, something we never could have predicted. That's how life works." Vexrel filed her 10th year report to the council. It was her last one. Her assignment had ended, and she was being recalled to other duties. "Nexar 7 is no longer a dead world," she wrote. "It is a living world in the early stages of development. The human colony has succeeded beyond any reasonable expectation. They have proven that terraforming is possible on a practical scale, using biological methods that require no exotic technology or unreasonable resources." She paused before writing her final paragraph, choosing her words with care. "I came here expecting to document a failure. Instead, I have witnessed something remarkable. Humans do not merely colonize worlds. They heal them. They bring life wherever they go, and that life flourishes in ways that seem almost miraculous. I do not fully understand how they do this or why they feel compelled to do it, but I can no longer doubt that they will continue." The council received her report. Some members dismissed it as exaggeration. Others studied it carefully, seeing implications that worried them. But on Nexar 7, life continued to grow regardless of what the council thought. The trees grew taller year by year. The grass spread farther across the plains. The animals multiplied and diversified into new niches. The insects filled the air with their songs every evening. And in a meadow near the original settlement, a young oak tree grew beside a weathered stone. Its branches reached toward a sky that now held clouds. Its roots dug into soil that had once been poison. Birds began to nest in its branches that spring. Small animals sheltered beneath its trunk during storms. Life gathered around it like a promise being kept, exactly as Sarah Chen had known it would. 50 years after the first colonists landed, Ambassador Vexrel returned to Nexar 7. She was old now, her 4 eyes dimmed with age. She had served on many worlds since leaving Station 12. She had seen many things throughout the galaxy, but she had never stopped thinking about the humans and their impossible project on a dead world. The world that greeted her was not the one she had left 4 decades ago. The shuttle flew over forests that stretched to the horizon in every direction. Rivers wound through valleys that had once been dust and bare rock. Cities spread across landscapes that had once been barren. Lakes sparkled in the sunlight, home to fish and frogs and countless other creatures that had never existed here before. Dr. Okonkwo had died 20 years ago, but his grandchildren met Vexrel at the landing pad. They were young and strong and confident, born on a world that had never been dead to them. "My grandfather talked about you often," said Maya Okonkwo, a woman with her grandfather's quick laugh. "He said you were the first alien to really understand what we were trying to do." "I am not sure I understood," Vexrel admitted honestly, "but I tried." They took her on a tour of the world she had helped document. Farms covered the fertile valleys. Towns had sprung up along the rivers. Children played in parks beneath trees that had grown tall and strong. The air was clean and fresh and full of the sounds of life. They visited Sarah Chen's grave. The oak tree beside it had grown massive over 50 years, its branches spreading wide to shelter the memorial garden that had formed around it. People came from all over the planet to see it, to remember the woman who had started everything. "She wanted to be here," Maya said. "She wanted to be part of the world she helped create." She achieved that wish in a way. More than she knew. The mycorrhizal network that connects all these trees passes right through this spot. She's literally part of the forest now, her nutrients feeding the roots. It's what she would have wanted. Vexrel did not fully understand the biology of what Maya described, but she recognized the poetry of it. They took her to meet the current director of Nexar 7, a man named Chen Okonkwo who carried the names of both founding families. He was the great-grandson of Dr. James Okonkwo and had married into the Chen family, uniting their legacies. "We've applied to the council for full membership," he told Vexrel proudly. "Nexar 7 is no longer a colony, it's a world, a living world with its own identity and its own future." "The council will grant it," Vexrel said. "They have no choice. You have proven everything we thought impossible." "Not impossible, just hard and worth doing." The Galactic Council met to consider the application. Representatives from over 200 species gathered to discuss the status of Nexar 7. The debate was surprisingly short. 50 years ago, this world was declared permanently dead, the High Chancellor said. Today, it supports a population of 3 million humans and a fully functioning ecosystem with thousands of species. The evidence is undeniable. Nexar 7 is alive. The vote was unanimous. Nexar 7 became a full member of the Galactic Council, with all the rights and responsibilities that membership entailed. But more importantly, it became an example for the entire galaxy. Other species began to study human terraforming techniques. Delegations visited to learn how to bring life to dead worlds. The Council established a new department dedicated to ecological restoration. Vexrel served as an advisor, sharing what she had learned in her years observing the humans. She helped design programs to heal worlds that had been damaged by war or neglect or simple carelessness. The first non-human terraforming project began 15 years later. A Cathari world that had been poisoned by industrial waste became the test case. They used human techniques. They brought in bacteria and worms and plants. They worked with patience and persistence. It took 20 years, but the world began to heal. The first rains fell, the first grass grew, the first trees took root. More projects followed across the galaxy. Dead worlds everywhere were evaluated for restoration potential. Some were declared hopeless, at least for now, but many more were found to be recoverable, given enough time and effort and commitment. Humans helped with many of these projects, sharing their expertise and their strange optimism freely. They seemed genuinely happy to see other species learning what they had always known in their bones. Life finds a way. Life can heal anything. Life flourishes wherever it is given a chance. Vexrel lived long enough to see 6 dead worlds brought back to life. She attended the ceremonies when each one achieved living status. She watched children run through forests that had not existed a generation ago. On her last day, she recorded a final message for the Council archives. "I have spent my life studying the universe," she said. "I have seen stars die and civilizations fall. I have seen destruction on scales that beggar imagination. But I have also seen something else. I have seen life return to places where it had been forgotten. I have seen worlds reborn." She paused, gathering her thoughts for what she wanted to say. "The humans taught us something important. They taught us that death is not always permanent, that damage can be repaired, that any world, no matter how broken, can be healed if someone is willing to do the work. This is their gift to the galaxy, not technology, not wealth, not power, but hope. The simple, stubborn, beautiful hope that tomorrow can be better than today. When Terran colonists land, they bring Earth life with them, and everywhere they go, everything flourishes, not because they are special, not because they have abilities no one else has, but because they refuse to give up, because they plant seeds knowing they will never see the trees, because they believe in a future they will never live to see. We should all be so foolish. We should all be so brave." The message was stored in the Council archives, where it would be preserved for generations. Scholars studied it. Leaders quoted it. It became part of how the galaxy understood humans and their strange, wonderful stubbornness. And on 100 worlds, and then 1,000, life continued to grow. Forests spread across barren plains. Rivers flowed where there had been only dust. Animals roamed and plants bloomed and insects sang their eternal songs through summer nights. The humans had shown what was possible. They had demonstrated that the universe was not a place of inevitable decay, but a place of endless potential. Death could be reversed. Destruction could be healed. The future could be green. Generations passed. The original colonists of Nexar 7 became legends, their stories told to children who had never known a dead world. Sarah Chen became almost a mythological figure, the grandmother of all who came after. New colony ships launched from Nexar 7 itself, carrying its children to other dead worlds. They brought with them the same cargo their ancestors had carried: bacteria and worms, insects and plants, animals and seeds. They brought Earth life in all its diversity and resilience. And they brought something else. They brought the memory of what had been accomplished. They brought the knowledge that even the most hopeless situation could be transformed. They brought the stubborn, unshakable belief that life was stronger than death. The galaxy changed, slowly at first, then faster as more species joined the effort. Dead worlds became fewer. Living worlds became more numerous. The great empty spaces between civilizations began to fill with green and growing things. And it all started on a dead world called Nexar 7, where a small group of humans decided that nothing was truly hopeless, where an alien ambassador learned to see potential where she had seen only waste, where an oak tree grew beside a grave and became a forest. The universe was waking up. And everything flourished.